Let's get down to business. Greetings, my name is Lena, and I am a typical 26-year-old woman who works in the field of mathematics. Even while it's not exactly the stuff of fairy tales, it's enough to pay the bills. Reed is a man who has been able to maintain his mental stability while working as a college professor. I am married to another man named Reed. He is 30 years old, which is 4 years older than I am. But who's counting? We don't have to worry about the drama that is going on in the world because we have this quaint little setting. Or so I had believed. Vivian, Reed's mother, appeared before him like a storm dressed up as a Sunday morning. She made it quite apparent from the very beginning that I was about as welcome as a tax audit. The very first time I met her, she examined me in such a way that it seemed as though I had just emerged from a cheap container. She spoke the words, "So, you're the accountant," in a tone that was dripping with something chilled. My response was, "Yes, ma'am," and I was attempting to preserve my composure. She mumbled, "Interesting," as she turned her attention to Reed. "I always thought you'd end up with someone more," as if it were a horrible perfume. That more lingered in the air. Not fancy enough. That's what I understood she meant. My parents are just normal people who put forth a lot of effort. They are not exactly newsworthy. On the other hand, Vivian, I supposed she was hoping that her son would be able to obtain a princess. As I stood there, I was Cinderella, but I was missing the fairy godmother. God bless Reed, he either decided not to notice it or did not see it. On the other hand, he would dismiss it by saying, "Mom is just old-fashioned." Vivian's barbs, however, became more pointed with each visit and each supper with the family. "Do you remember Kara, your former girlfriend? Wasn't she a lawyer, was she? It's a terrible thing that the two of you fell out." I made an effort to laugh it off and concentrate on the positive aspects, such as the fact that Reed and I were creating our own little universe. Having a secure job, a home, and making plans for the future together are all important. On the other hand, the words spoken by Vivian, man, they cling to you like gum on your shoe. At some point, we find ourselves having supper at their residence. When it comes to applauding Reed's achievements and how he is a shining beacon for the family, Vivian is going all out. After that, she turns to me with a smile that has the potential to freeze the entire world. As for Lena, I notice that she is still experimenting with numbers. It's very charming. At long last, Reed spoke out and said, "Mom, come on. Lena is doing exceptionally well at her job." Nevertheless, Vivian just waved him off. "Indeed, without a doubt, yes. I suppose that we should all do what we are able to accomplish." You were the only person in the world who did not understand the joke, and it was like living in a comedy. Reed incessantly advised me to disregard her, stating that it was irrelevant to me because of her opinion. The statement was simple for him to make because he was not the one who received the verbal side-eye each time we crossed the door. At that point, I began to dread such visits. It was like stepping into a minefield while blindfolded for the intensity and the backhanded compliments that were being given. I, on the other hand, swallowed it up for Reed. It's interesting how love can make you do absurd things, like put up with a lady who wishes you were someone else instead of who you are. So, that's the scoop. Lena, the bride who, according to the queen bee herself, cannot be considered appropriate. Living the dream one snide comment at a time is the way to go. However, hey, at least it's our dream, isn't that one? And there was no way that my mother-in-law, who was a powerful figure, could take it away from me without putting up a battle. Nevertheless, life has its own unique way of delivering curveballs, and the one that I received was in the form of a peanut. You read it correctly, it is a peanut that is so small that it is invisible. For me, eating them is like playing Russian roulette. even though the majority of people don't give it a second thought before doing so. It was when I was only a youngster that I learned this lesson the hard way. A tablespoon of peanut butter turned into an emergency trip to the emergency room. The question, what's in the food, has been a never-ending game in my life ever since that time. This is nothing new for Reed. While I was in restaurants, he witnessed me pulling out my allergy card and questioning the wait staff as if I were investigating a crime. There are peanuts in here, right? What about contamination from other sources? Some people get it, while others look at me as if I were a diva who was making a big deal out of nothing. Afterwards, there is Vivian. During the initial conversation we had about my allergies, her eyes were dangerously close to falling out of her head. Despite the fact that I had just told her that I was allergic to breathing, she sneered and said, "You're allergic to peanuts. In addition, there is soy, peas, and what else? Is it air?" He leaped in, and may God bless him. "This is quite serious, Mom. It's possible that Lena will land in the hospital." It was dismissed by Vivian. "Oh, if you please. On a daily basis, people consume peanuts. You have it all in your brain." I was about to respond, but Reed gently gripped my hand beneath the table, almost as if he was pleading with me to let go of it. I didn't give it much thought since I believed it was an isolated incident. Nevertheless, Vivian was required to put up a performance each and every time. The dinner turned into a gamble. Everywhere she went, she would flaunt her dishes, bragging about how she had made everything safe for Lena. On the other hand, her voice always had a certain edge to it, giving the impression that she was joking about with me and playing along with my little problem. She once presented this elegant dish while beaming with pride and a smile on her face. "Produced it on my own. There will be no peanuts whatsoever," she said. I had a cautious attitude. "Do you have any doubts, Vivian? There is no denying the severity of my allergies." Her eyes were rolled back. "Of course, I have no doubt. What kind of a monstrous creature do you consider me to be?" It was at that moment that I made a decision that would change my life forever. I went ahead and took a small mouthful, and then, all of a sudden, I was filled with regret. I started experiencing itching in my throat, and my skin became red and swollen. In an instant, Reed was on his feet, and his face was covered in a look of apparent fear. What is Vivian's response? "Oh my goodness, it must have been something else. Your behavior is usually so theatrical." Spectacular. While I was searching for my EpiPen in a frenzied manner, I had the sensation that my throat was shutting up. Reed was enraged by him. "Mom, this is completely serious. Take a look at her." However, Vivian did nothing except stand there, her expression a combination of amazement and obstinate denial. Following that occurrence, Reed and I established the rules of the game. Unless Vivian is able to take my allergies seriously, I will not be eating at her restaurant again. There was a whole lot going on, with Reed having a disagreement with his mother, me feeling like a burden, and everything else. The clincher, however, is that, in spite of this, Vivian continued to behave as if I was making everything up, as if my allergies were some kind of personal assault on her cuisine or something. One day, I overheard her saying, "Reed, it's always something with Lena," and I decided to listen in. "I am unable to consume either of these foods. How are you able to have such a life?" Reed, who is known for his ability to maintain harmony, made an attempt to explain that my allergies were quite genuine and that there was no way to avoid them. On the other hand, Vivian, simply put, she did not wish to listen to it. That individual is as obstinate as a mule. In other words, peanuts. I had no idea that something so insignificant could provoke such a significant uproar. On the other hand, here I am, hanging on by a thread, one bite at a time. Is that Vivian? Still, she is under the impression that I am simply being tough. However, just think about it. What would life be without a little bit of drama around the dinner table? All of Vivian's trips to our home grew more regular than a poor rerun of a comedy, and each one of them included its own unique collection of insults and remarking. It was almost as if she had a list of things she could do to make me feel insignificant, and she was going through each item on the list one by one. I was in the middle of my weekend leisure mood when she unexpectedly stopped by one afternoon. She was wearing sweatpants, no makeup, and the house was already in a well-lived-in state. Her style was to drop by without prior notice. She groaned and stepped over a pile of magazines that I hadn't gotten around to tidying up yet. "Oh, Lena," she said. "I see we're still embracing the casual approach to housekeeping." I suppressed a response out of my mouth while mentally counting to 10. "Having a wonderful time on my day off, Vivian. Do you want some coffee?" Despite the fact that her nose was wrinkled as if she had just stepped into a garbage, she declined the offer. "I'm at a loss. It's really unlikely that you have something that hasn't used up yet." It was more out of spite than anything else that I was boiling water, but I couldn't help but feel the sting as I did so. You know, not everyone measures their worth by how clean their countertops are. Vivian sat in the living room with a look of disgust on her face. "That has nothing to do with value, Lena. Having pride in your property is the essential component. But let's not pretend that you would comprehend that, should we?" What really took my goat was when she began in on more personal issues, which is something you don't simply toss about in casual conversation. The jabs were getting old, but what really got my goat was with her. The tone of her voice was tinged with something that I couldn't quite pinpoint, whether it was concern or uncertainty. "You know, Reed told me that you two are trying for a baby," she continued. "I just hope, for your sake, it doesn't inherit your propensity for health issues." There was a close call with the kettle. "Excuse me." Vivian shrugged, demonstrating her mastery of a semblance of innocence. "To put it simply, it is a miracle that you are able to operate at all, considering your allergies and other conditions. These days, it is impossible to be too careful." The implication was very plain, and it struck like a blow to the gut. It was a mixture of fury and pain that caused my hands to shake. "My allergies have nothing to do with my ability to have a healthy child, Vivian." "Oh, sweetheart, of course they do," she said. "But there's no need to be concerned," she said as she caressed my arm with a chill that might ice hell. "I'm sure there's still hope for you." I was fuming, and every ounce of my being yearned to strike out, to reprimand her, to protect myself and my future children from her irrational judgments. I was seeing things. Nevertheless, before I could come up with an answer, Reed entered the room displaying the epitome of heedless happiness. "Hey, how are you doing? Hey, Mom and Lena, how are things doing here?" As the Ice Queen began to melt into a semblance of warmth, Vivian underwent a transformation. "Just having a little chat with Lena, you know, girl talk." I stared at Reed, my eyes begging him to see through the deception, but as is his custom, he failed to recognize the quiet signs that I was giving him. "That is very cool. Have you decided to remain for supper, Mom?" The remainder of the visit was a haze of forced civility and biting my tongue as I tried to save my dignity. Immediately following Vivian's departure, I went to Reed, my anger and hurt beginning to bubble over. "Are you oblivious to the things that she is saying to me? What about us?" Reed sighed, ever the one to bring about calm. "You are aware of how she behaves, Lena. Is it okay if you just let things go? Not worth the anguish that it causes. Not worth the stress." Incredulous, I repeated what you said. The implication that she is making is that it would be better for our kid to not be born. To what extent does that not warrant arousing one's anger? The only thing he had to say was the same old stale spiel about forgetting and moving on. He did not say anything. But certain things, certain phrases that remain in your mind and continue to reverberate long after they have been uttered. Also, can you forget? It is not as simple as it may sound. When you least expect it, life has a strange way of throwing you for a loop. This is something that happens very frequently. There are other instances when it is not a curveball, but rather a surprise that is so great that it knocks the wind out of you, and most of the time, it is in a positive way. The news came to me on a Tuesday. At that moment, the sun was doing that thing where it was not quite ready to set, but you could see that it was having some thoughts about it. You know, I have been feeling a little weird for a while now. but it wasn't anything severe. It was just off enough that I decided to get one of those tests from the drugstore, just to have a second opinion. So there I was, in the toilet of our home, gazing at this small stick that had the audacity to completely transform my life in the period of 3 minutes. Not negative. I glanced once again after blinking. Not a negative note. My voice reverberated off the tiles to say, "Read," and it was a mixture of terror and something I couldn't quite put my finger on. In an instant, he was there, the lines of stress that had already begun to appear on his forehead becoming in full view. "What's going on? Is everything all right?" It was with a shaky hand that I handed him the test. "Does this look positive to you?" Before his eyes met mine, he took it while peering at the little window. His eyes then jumped up to meet mine. "Holy, is this?" "Yeah," I managed to say, a chuckle bursting forth from some inaccessible part of my being. "I think we're having a baby," until Reed threw his arms around me in an embrace that was so tight that I thought I would burst. The stillness that followed was heavy and loaded with 1,000 things that were left unsaid. "This is very incredible, Em. Both of us are going to become parents." Parents. Upon my tongue, the word appeared strange. It was too large for me to completely comprehend at this point in time. However, shortly after that, the truth of our circumstance began to sink in, and the shadow of Vivian's words began to linger in the back of my mind. What kind of response would she have to this information? The question is whether she would consider it a miracle or merely another thing to criticize. My concerns were communicated to Reed while he was still around me with his arms. "Where is your mother, exactly? You are aware of what she has been expressing." Taking a step back, he looked me in the eyes and then drew away. "Is it acceptable if I forget about my mother? Specifically, this pertains to our family. We will deal with her when it is necessary to do so." Although it was easier to say than to achieve at that very moment, when the sun was sinking and giving a warm warmth about us, it seemed like it was conceivable. Together, we were in this situation. Reed requested that we phone his parents to tell them the news once the initial shock and excitement had subsided a little bit. At the mere notion of it, I had a tightening in my gut. The wild card that I wasn't sure I was prepared to cope with was Vivian's response before the game began. Nevertheless, being able to conceal it was not an option, and a portion of me wished for the best. In the beginning, we had Cyrus, Reed's father. Following the second ring, he picked up, and Reed did not waste any time in doing so. "Dear Dad, I have some news for you. Lena is expecting a child." Even though we were talking on the phone, Cyrus's voice was filled with an infectious energy. "That is just great. You are very welcome. In the future, I will be a grandfather." My heart was calmed by his genuine delight, which was a welcome relief. We would be grateful if we could collect his response in a bottle and give it to Vivian. When we talk about the devil, the next person to speak was her. The call was transferred to the speaker, and after the customary greetings, Reed revealed the shocking information. There was a silence, a lengthy one, during which Vivian could almost be heard analyzing the information that had been presented. In the end, she began to speak, although her voice was not as crisp as it normally is. "I must say, this comes as a surprise. We have to raise a glass. A family get-together is going to be organized by me in a couple of weeks. Encourage everyone to take part in the happiness." It was her remarks that took me by surprise. Would this be the same Vivian who analyzed each and every one of my actions, who had any doubts about our future felicity? Despite this, Reed did not miss a single beat. "Mom, it is sounding wonderful. We will be present." Without anyone being able to see it, I gave a little nod of assent. What other options do I have? Even though I had some misgivings, I believe that this was an attempt to make peace, or a thorn bush that has been well concealed. However, only time would tell. As we hung up, Reed was grinning, caught up in the thrill of becoming a father and maybe, foolishly, the expectation that his mother's reaction indicated a change of heart. He did not know that his mother had changed her mind. I took a more careful approach, as the skepticism was a difficult shell to remove. My thoughts was racing as I lay in bed that night, with Reed's regular breathing providing a cadence that was both reassuring and soothing. Where would this get-together of the family take place? If I were to walk into a lion's cave dressed up as a baby shower, would it be a true celebration, or would I be heading into chaos? The abrupt transition that Vivian made from being the ice queen to becoming the pleasant hostess not sat well with me. In spite of this, I was prepared to comply, at least for the time being, since I cared about Reed and the future of our child. My thoughts were filled with a mixture of joy and worry as I contemplated the forthcoming holiday, which was looming big in my mind. What would be waiting for us when we arrived? In point of fact, arriving at Reed's parents' residence was like to walking onto a stage. The evening was scheduled to be a performance, and the audience consisted of members of Reed's family who were prepared to offer their congratulations. There was a striking contrast between the typical frost that I felt from Vivian and the genuine warmth that I received from their well wishes. Tonight, however, she was able to muster a grin that appeared to be less forced than usual, and her congratulations carried with them a trace of something that resembled happiness. Nevertheless, it was Cyrus, Reed's father, who immediately drew my attention. His smiles were short and preoccupied, and his normally cheery disposition was replaced by a shadow of worry. These changes occurred when we were all gathered around the table, which was piled with more dishes than a Thanksgiving feast. I decided to play it safe and stick to the items that I knew were safe for me to eat because I had a long list of food allergies. It was at that moment that Vivian made a gesture toward a delicious pie, which was a move that seemed completely unexpected. She emphasized, "Lena, I made sure that this was something that you could enjoy, special, just for you," with a hint of desire in her voice that I was unable to fully trust. I grabbed for a slice of pizza with trepidation, which was more affected by the desire to be at peace than by my hunger. However, before it could even get close to touching my plate, Cyrus's hand appeared out of nowhere and slammed the plate, complete with the pie, to the ground. Vivian's face was completely devoid of color, and her horror was a reflection of our own. The room fell into a startled quiet, and every eye was drawn to us. Reed turned to his father at the very time that the plate hit the floor, breaking the silence like a glass that had been dropped in a room that was otherwise calm. Reed's voice was tight with surprise and fury. "Dad, what is the reason? Why would you choose to act in such a manner?" The generally humorous expression on Cyrus's face was replaced with a gravity that appeared out of place. Cyrus stood there, his normally easygoing disposition gone. Everyone in the room was staring at Cyrus, the broken dish, and us with their eyes darting back and forth between the three of them. Cyrus's voice, which is typically kind and inviting, suddenly reverberated around the living room with such force that it caused a number of family to cringe momentarily. He stated, "I can't be a part of this crime," while his eyes were fixed on Vivian, who appeared to have just witnessed a ghost. "You did what?" As Reed spoke, his voice broke, and his words were etched with incredulity. The following words that Cyrus spoke were like a blow to the stomach. He said, pointing directly at Vivian, selected and prepared dishes comprised of peanuts and other ingredients that Lena is not allowed to consume. She was aware of it. She wished that it would be painful for Lena, and perhaps even enough to cause her to lose the baby. The stillness that ensued was stifling throughout that time. All eyes gradually moved to Vivian, whose face had lost its color and then turned a deep scarlet. She had been caught in the act by her own husband's admission, and everybody was staring at her. The typical rapid comebacks and sharp tongue that Vivian is known for were nowhere to be found, and she appeared to be at a loss for words for the first time. The atmosphere was thick with astonishment, bewilderment, and a mounting sense of fury, and the room had the sensation of being frozen. Even when Vivian's mouth was open and closed, she did not produce any sound. The understanding of her deeds and the ramifications of those actions gradually crept into her consciousness as she glanced from Cyrus to Reed to me. Following the first shock, the rest of the family began to mumble among themselves, and the initial astonishment eventually gave way to a chorus of disapproval and incredulity. Words such as unbelievable and how could she were heard across the room, portraying Vivian as the antagonist in her own family. The weight of the information that Cyrus had divulged was pressing heavily on me as I remained there, unable to move from the location I was standing in. It was difficult to comprehend the idea that Vivian would go to such great measures to get rid of me. She had such a strong hatred for me that she would put my health and the life of my child in danger doing so. Only Reed's voice, which was both astonished and indignant, could be heard breaking the startled quiet that had descended over the room as a result of Cyrus's unexpected disclosure. Reed's voice was directed at his mother. "For what reason do you despise Lena so much, Mom? Whatever it is that she has done to you that has earned you this?" Everything about Vivian's answer might be described as explosive. A venomous tone could be heard in her voice as she yelled, "I can't stand her. Reed, she is not the proper person for you. She is not deserving of being a member of this family because she is unable to provide you with children who are healthy." Reed's face went a shade of crimson that I had never seen before, and his typical patience and tolerance for his mother's antics vanished right in front of my eyes. On the other hand, he yelled back, "That's enough, Mom," with his voice quivering with wrath. "I couldn't believe you would go to such great lengths. For the time being, I do not wish to see you. I was under the impression that I knew you as a mother." As they drove back to their house, the atmosphere was tight, the air dense with words that were not uttered, and the weight of what had just taken place was heavy. As soon as we arrived at our destination, Reed shifted his attention to me, his look gradually changed from one of fury to one of regret. "I'm so sorry, Lena," he said, his voice heaving with the weight of his feelings. "It was my fault that I did not support you sooner. I ought to have realized how poisonous the situation was. To think that my own mother would act in such a manner is beyond my comprehension." In his eyes I could feel the anguish that he was experiencing as a result of the conflict between his love for me and his allegiance to his family. "Reed, you are not to blame for this." My response was, "We could not have known that she would do something like this," and I was attempting to provide some solace despite the fact that my own feelings were all over the place. However, the harm had already been done. Reed's bond with his mother, which had been impenetrable in the past, had been irreparably broken at this point. Vivian had gained a reputation for being a pariah, not just among us but also among our extended family and acquaintances more generally. The actions she took, which were motivated by illogical anger and worries that were not based, had entirely alienated her. In the end, Cyrus discovered that he was unable to continue his relationship with Vivian, despite the fact that he had taken a stand and disclosed the truth at the risk of his own marriage. Despite the fact that the divorce did not occur immediately, it was an inevitable outcome. He could not handle the thought of living with someone who was capable of such a malicious act and who had plotted against their own grandson, who was yet unborn. As the old saying goes, life finds a way to go forward, and whether we are prepared or not, it will take us along for the journey. After the storm had passed, Reed and I found ourselves returning to the routine of our everyday lives, but this time with a fresh appreciation for the rare moments of tranquility and an anticipation for the future, particularly in light of the fact that our child was on the way. As time went on, Cyrus, Reed's father, became something of a regular presence at our home. Being in his company was a soothing experience, and his eagerness to provide a hand around the house, as well as his enthusiasm at the prospect of becoming a grandparent, were contagious. Being in his presence was a pleasant experience, and it gave us the impression that we were constructing a new sort of family unit, one that was founded on mutual respect and understanding rather than obligation and expectation. "We're really doing this, huh?" As Reed would say this, his hands would rest on my stomach and a smile would dance over his lips. "We're going to be parents." "Yeah," I would respond, the realization of everything rolling over me in waves of happiness and apprehensive anticipation. "Yeah," I would say, "we're going to be great. You'll see." Regarding Vivian, her name is not something that we talk about very often these days. It was still too soon after she had inflicted the damage, and the treachery was still too sudden. However, rumors of her new life would periodically make their way to us through the grapevine. She was living in a modest apartment that she rented, and she had returned to the workforce after a period of working for several decades. The opulent existence that she had formerly governed with such authority was a long cry from what she was enjoying now. If I were to say that I felt sorry for her, I would be lying. When I was younger, I might have been able to empathize with her predicament because it was something that came easy to me. In spite of all, however, compassion was difficult to convince. The decisions that she made, as well as the malicious intent with which she attempted to break our small family apart, just cannot be forgiven. In certain instances, Cyrus would add, "It's a shame, really," while maintaining a detached expression in his eye. She made her bed, though. In response, Reed and I would both say, "Yeah," and then the conversation would swiftly go to more pleasant things. It was hardly a source of happiness to linger on Vivian's fall from grace. The advent of our child and the family that we were constructing together were the primary focal points of our attention at the time, one that is brimming with love and free of the toxicity that had formerly threatened to consume us from the inside out. As Reed's hand found mine, he would tell me, "We've got each other," which was a quiet guarantee of support and solidarity. That's all we really need. Indeed, he was correct. Hope was a continuous companion for us as we continued to wait for the arrival of our kid. Hope for our child's health, hope for our happiness, and hope for a future. When contrasted with the radiance of our fresh start, the shadows of the past were nothing more than shadows. They were dim and unimportant.
I smoothed the wrinkles on my silk evening gown and took a deep breath. Tonight's celebration dinner at the country club was supposed to be a joyous occasion, marking my husband Martin's retirement after decades at the helm of Reese Industries. Little did I know it would become the stage for one of the most shocking betrayals of my life. As we clinked champagne glasses with the board members and their spouses, Martin cleared his throat. "I have an announcement to make," he declared, his eyes flickering toward a young woman at the other end of the table. My heart sank as I recognized Ava Carter, one of the junior marketing executives. The way Martin looked at her made my stomach churn. "Lillian and I have decided to get divorced," Martin continued, his voice unwavering. "I've fallen in love with someone else, and we plan to marry soon." A hush fell over the table as gasps and murmurs erupted. I felt all eyes boring into me, waiting for my reaction. Tears stunned my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. "You coward," I spat at Martin, my voice trembling with fury. "How dare you blindside me like this?" "I'm sorry, Lillian," he said, not sounding sorry at all. "But I've made up my mind. Ava understands me in a way you never could." Ava shifted uncomfortably, her cheeks flushed. I shot her a withering glare, wondering how this naive girl could be so foolish. As the dinner descended into chaos, I excused myself, desperate for air. Out on the terrace, I leaned against the railing, trying to steady my breathing. Anger and humiliation washed over me in waves. Martin had been my whole world for over 30 years. We built Reese Industries together from the ground up, sacrificing countless nights and weekends. And this was how he repaid me, by casting me aside for someone half my age. I wiped away a stray tear, my jaw clenched with determination. If Martin thought I would go down without a fight, he was sorely mistaken. Game on, I thought grimly. The gloves were coming off. I tossed and turned that night, replaying the horror of Martin's betrayal over and over in my mind. How could the man I'd loved and supported for decades do this to me, to our family? As the first rays of dawn peeked through the curtains, I knew I couldn't wallow in misery any longer. If Martin wanted war, then war was what he'd get. I marched into the private bathroom and examined my reflection in the mirror. Though my eyes were puffy from crying, my resolve had never been stronger. I was Lillian Reese, and I would not be the victim here. The first order of business was hiring a bulldog of a divorce attorney. I had my secretary line up meetings with the city's most cutthroat legal eagles. Within a matter of hours, I was sitting across from Jennifer Holder, a ferocious litigator known for devouring wandering husbands. "I want to bleed him dry," I stated bluntly as Jennifer flipped through my financial documents. She arched an immaculately groomed eyebrow. Even with your substantial assets, a nasty divorce could deplete your net worth considerably. Money is no object, I said through gritted teeth. That lying snake is going to pay for what he did to me and my family's legacy. A feral grin spread across Jennifer's razor-sharp features. Then let's make sure we take him for everything he's worth. Over the next few weeks, I followed Jennifer's guidance to the letter, marshaling every resource at my disposal. Quiet instructions were issued to Reese Industries' accounting department for a full forensic audit under the guise of routine due diligence. Every bank statement, every money transfer, I wanted them come through with a fine-tooth comb. Jennifer coached me on sowing seeds of doubt among the board members, suggesting personal concerns over Martin's ability to properly steer the company given his emotionally compromised state. A few whispered comments here, a furrowed brow there, and suddenly the company I'd helped build was questioning my husband's leadership. All the while, Martin sauntered around in a loved-up daze, oblivious to the powder keg I was carefully constructing around him. He thought I would simply walk away, that I would be content with whatever crumbs he deemed to toss my way in the divorce. The poor fool had no idea what kind of hell was coming. The forensic audit quickly bore fruit, revealing a tangled web of shady dealings all connected to Martin's desperation to impress his young mistress. Inflated expense reports, kickbacks from vendors, even outright embezzlement. He put Reese Industries' financial health at risk to fund his lavish courtship of Ava. I pored over the damning documents late into the night, my fury growing with each uncovered impropriety. This was the true depth of Martin's deceit. He was willing to sacrifice our life's work, the company we built from nothing, all for a fling with a girl young enough to be his daughter. The next morning, I hand-delivered the audit findings to the board, making sure to linger on the most egregious violations with pointed commentary. Clearly, Martin's judgment has been clouded by his personal indiscretions, I stated, careful to keep my tone measured despite the storm raging inside me. I shudder to think how much further this rot might have spread if left unchecked. One by one, I watched the concern etching itself onto the board members' faces. Even Martin's most ardent supporters couldn't deny the evidence of his mismanagement and potential criminality. Martin, for his part, seemed stunned by my revelations. The fool actually had the audacity to pull me aside and try to plead ignorance. "Lillian, you have to believe me. I never meant for things to go this far," he blubbered. "I've made some mistakes, sure, but it was all for love." I recoiled from his clammy grasp, disgust written plain across my face. "For love? You jeopardized everything we built together for some cheap fling. I don't even recognize you anymore." As is summoned, Ava appeared in the doorway, her overdone makeup unable to mask the fragility beneath. Martin's eyes immediately locked onto her, his entire stance changing as if their bond transcended the tawdry reality. "Don't worry, my dear," he cooed. "Once the old ball and chain is out of the way, nothing will keep us apart." The naked cruelty in his voice awakened an icy clarity in me. Forget taking him for everything he was worth. This man deserved to lose it all. I crossed the room and stood squarely between Martin and his prize. "Let me make one thing clear to both of you. I am not going anywhere. This company was my lifelong endeavor long before you came along, Ava, and I'll be damned if I let either of you destroy it with your recklessness." Ava opened her mouth, her panicked eyes flicking to Martin for support, but I cut her off with a sharp gesture. "As for you," I turned my withering gaze onto my soon-to-be ex-husband. "I did not survive decades of your insufferable ego just to be discarded in your twilight years. You want to play in the mud with this girl? Be my guest, but I guarantee the only thing awaiting you is regret." Turning on my heel, I left them gaping in my wake, already planning my next salvo. Let them have their fantasy for now. Their world was about to come crashing down. With the audit findings laying bare Martin's misdeeds, I knew I held all the leverage for ensuring a favorable divorce settlement. Still, I intended to twist the knife further before going in for the kill. I requested an emergency meeting with Martin, putting on my best act of contriteness when he arrived. "I've had some time to reflect on things," I began, wringing my hands for effect, "and I realize now how terribly I've behaved." Martin's eyes widened in surprise, and I fought back the urge to sneer at his gullibility. "Really? You're finally coming around." I was just so hurt and angry, I continued, letting my voice quaver with manufactured regret. "But I see now that I can't force you to love me. You found happiness with Ava, and it's not my place to stand in the way of true love. The smug satisfaction oozing from his expression was almost too much to bear. Well, I'm glad you've come to your senses. This has been difficult enough without your vindictiveness making things worse. I reached across the table and grasped his hand, putting on my best pleading expression. I only want what's best for you, Martin, which is why you have to end this affair immediately. His brow furrowed in confusion. What? Why would I do that? Leaning in, I lowered my voice conspiratorially. Because I'm afraid Ava has been using you this whole time, taking advantage of your generous nature for her own gain. Martin opened his mouth to protest, but I barreled on with my carefully constructed narrative. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but I've discovered evidence that she's been having other affairs. Multiple affairs, Martin. She's been bleeding you dry to fund her indiscretions behind your back. His face cycled through a kaleidoscope of emotions. Anger, hurt, disbelief. No, Ava would never. We love each other. Putting on my most sorrowful expression, I gave his hand a pat. I'm so sorry, but it's true. The bank records, the money transfers, it's all there in black and white. She's been making a fool of you. Martin's shoulders slumped in defeat. For just an instant, I felt a pang of something, pity perhaps. It quickly passed as I recalled all the anguish she put me through. If it's any consolation, this newfound wisdom has made me realize how deeply I've misjudged you over the years. I lied through my teeth. Why, if I had a partner who showed half the care and steadfast dedication you've displayed, I would consider myself the luckiest woman alive. That seemed to bolster Martin's spirit somewhat as he mumbled a thank you. Men were so easy to manipulate once you mastered their fragile egos. As he lumbered out, I allowed myself a satisfied smile. Between the gaping financial void awaiting him and the carefully planted seeds of doubt about his precious Ava's fidelity, Martin's world was crumbling all around him. Just a few more shoves, and the whole pathetic facade would come crashing down in delicious ruin. With Martin reeling from my revelations about Ava's supposed infidelity, it was time to go for the kill shot. I convened an emergency board meeting, putting on my most solemn expression as the members filed in. I'm afraid I have some deeply troubling news regarding Martin's conduct as CEO. I began once everyone was seated. It pains me to have to do this, but the evidence leaves me no choice. I nodded to my assistant, who distributed the damning audit findings, letting the weight of the financials speak for themselves. Audible gasps and murmurs rippled through the room as they digested the extent of the embezzlement and misappropriation. As you can see, Martin has been systematically looting the company's coffers, all to fund an utterly unacceptable personal relationship, I declared, letting the accusation hang heavy in the air. His judgment has been hopelessly compromised to a degree that constitutes gross dereliction of duty. Walter Grimes, one of the senior board members known for his unshakable ethics, set down the report with a look of profound disappointment. I had my suspicions, given the rumors, but I never imagined the depths of Martin's betrayal. This is a gut punch. Believe me, Walter, I understand your pain all too well, I replied, putting on my most mournful expression. Which is why, as difficult as it is, I feel we have no choice but to relieve Martin of his duties, effective immediately. A chorus of solemn nods rippled through the room. Even those typically loyal to Martin seemed unable to overlook his staggering lapses. Gritting my teeth, I forced out my next words. It truly breaks my heart to say this, but Martin's personal indiscretions appear to have sent him into an emotional tailspin, calling into question his fitness to lead this company. For the good of Reese Industries and our employees, I recommend an indefinite leave of absence on medical grounds while he seeks treatment. The cowed reactions told me they had taken the bait. By portraying Martin's ouster as a compassionate intervention rather than a straight termination, I had given them all plausible deniability to avoid feeling complicit in his downfall. As the meeting adjourned with the board's full endorsement, I allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. Everything was falling into place perfectly. The forensics, the sowing of doubts, and now this coup de grace. A part of me felt a flicker of sadness at how far my beloved husband had fallen. But he had chosen to throw away the life we built together through his arrogance and weakness. I merely ensured he suffered the full consequences. My reverie was interrupted by the ping of a new email from Jennifer, my attorney. Pulling up the message, I scanned her concise update and felt a rush of vicious satisfaction. Transfer of assets proceeding as planned. The financial guillotine is primed. Just say the word. I typed a simple reply. Do it. Let the delicious ruination begin. The dominoes began falling into place with ruthless precision. Within days of being forced into a leave of absence, Martin found himself being systematically frozen out of Reese Industries operations. Emails went unanswered, meetings rescheduled, until he was essentially a ghost presence at the company he had once lorded over. I could only imagine the sinking feeling in the pit of his gut as the power he had taken for granted for decades slipped through his fingers. Still, I knew the worst was yet to come for the arrogant fool. "Ms. Reese, you have a visitor," my assistant's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ava Carter is asking to see you." A cruel smile tugged at my lips as I buzzed her in. The girl's arrival was right on schedule. Ava entered, looking every bit the rabbit caught in the headlights. Though she tried valiantly to maintain her polished composure, I could see the cracks spider webbing beneath the surface. "What can I do for you, dear?" I asked in my most saccharine tone as she took a seat. "I trust this isn't about your extracurricular activities with Martin. I would simply hate for word of that unpleasantness to spread further." Her eyes went wide with panic. What are you talking about?" "Oh, I'm sure it's nothing." I waved a perfectly manicured hand in feigned nonchalance. "Just that it would be an awful shame if those private investigator reports detailing your numerous other affairs ended up going public. Can you imagine the scandal?" Ava paled, and I fought back the urge to cackle at her obvious distress. The phony dossier I had concocted was truly a work of art. "But that's not true," she sputtered. "Martin and we love each other. It's just us." "If you say so, dear," I replied coolly. Though if I were you, I might be more concerned with his mounting legal troubles and the likelihood of financial ruin. That caught her attention, as I'd intended. Leaning forward, I laid it all out for her in brutal clarity. The fraud charges looming over Martin, the asset freezes, the inevitable collapse of his net worth once the divorce was finalized. "Do you honestly think a man facing prison time and bankruptcy will have any qualms about leaving you high and dry?" I asked with mock sympathy. "Or that you'll still hold any appeal to him once the thrill of your tawdry affair fades?" Ava's porcelain features crumpled as the truth sank in. She was nothing more than a disposable plaything to Martin, shiny arm candy to be cast aside the moment she ceased to be convenient. "You're lying," she whispered. But it was clear she didn't believe her own words. Smiling thinly, I delivered the killing blow. "If I were you, I'd get out while you still can. Cut your losses and find yourself a fresh mark to leech off of. Plenty of rich, desperate fools out there to exploit." A single tear rolled down Ava's cheek as she stared at me in wordless stupor. I gave her a few moments to absorb the reality crashing down around her before delivering the final twist of the knife. "Oh, and one more thing before you go running back to that pathetic creature you've been betting," I added with sugary venom. "I'd strongly advise emptying out any of Martin's personal accounts or assets you have access to. You'll need whatever you can get to restart your entrepreneurial activities." For just an instant, Ava's mask slipped, and I saw the ruthless mercenary parasite lurking underneath. That was all the confirmation I needed that my carefully planted mole had succeeded in guiding her toward the path of maximum damage. Nodding to herself, Ava stood and wiped away the crocodile tears before squaring her shoulders in false bravado. "You're going to regret this," she spat out in a tremulous voice utterly devoid of conviction. I simply laughed as she turned on her heel and stormed out. The delusional girl had no idea how correct she was, but not for the reasons she thought. Once this was all over, the only regret I would feel was not destroying them even sooner. The endgame was finally upon us. Within weeks of Ava's hasty exit, the other shoe dropped with a reverberating thud that shook Martin to his core. I took no small pleasure in being present as the investigator from our corporate security team laid out the damning evidence: bank statements, wire transfers, photos, an entire dossier documenting how Ava had systematically looted over 7 figures from Martin's personal accounts and investment portfolios. She couldn't have," Martin stammered, his face becoming an ashen mask of disbelief. "We were going to start a life together." The investigator simply shrugged, his expression one of practiced neutrality. "I'm afraid the money trail doesn't lie, Mr. Reese. This appears to have been a long-running scheme to bleed you dry." Martin's eyes found mine, pleading for a lifeline amidst the crashing waves of betrayal. "Lillian, you have to believe me. I never thought she was capable of something like this." I crossed my arms, regarding him with a look of utter disdain. Really, Martin? Because it seems to me that poor judgment and self-delusion have become something of a pattern for you lately. His shoulders sagged in defeat as the weight of his situation clearly crushed down upon him. It would have been almost pitiable if he weren't such a despicable creature. But I don't understand. Why? Why would she do this to me after everything I sacrificed? He choked out. This time I allowed myself a feral smile. Isn't it obvious? You were nothing more than a means to an end. A vain, gullible fool ripe for the fleecing by someone younger and prettier who knew just which strings to pull. Martin opened his mouth, no doubt to try and defend his precious Ava's honor, but I silenced him with a raised hand. Save your breath and what little dignity you have left. This is just the opening act. My smile twisted into something darker. The avalanche was coming, and he was going to lose everything. Over the next several days, the full scope of Martin's ruination began revealing itself. The financial penalties and legal fees started piling up, draining his liquid assets. Forensic auditors identified even more dubious transactions and potential tax avoidance schemes, bringing down the wrath of the IRS. Meanwhile, the revelations of corporate malfeasance I had carefully stoked stripped Martin of every remaining board seat and title position. He went from captaining a billion-dollar empire to a shunned pariah in the span of a month, his legacy crumbling into dust. The killing blow, however, came from an unexpected direction. The gossip rags and society pages that had once fawned over his storybook marriage to me were now tearing him apart. With the collapse of his non-disclosure agreement as part of the divorce proceedings, I carefully fed tantalizing morsels about his affair and accompanying spending benders to key media contacts. Soon tales of poor, used Martin and his gold-digging mistress were splashed across the glossies in salacious detail. A scandal of such delicious karmic proportions was simply too irresistible to avoid, no matter how much old money changed hands to smother it initially. In one final insult, Martin's beloved country club membership was terminated under a cloud of humiliation, the old guard closing ranks around him like a vice. He had become a cautionary tale, something to be shunned and whispered about over chilled Martinez. When he inevitably crawled back to me, begging for clemency and a chance to restore some fragment of his former life, I denied him with icy finality. "This is the bed you made for yourself, Martin," I said, unmoved by his pleas. "I suggest you learn to sleep in it." As he slumped away, broken and discarded, I felt an unfamiliar sensation blossom within me. Not quite happiness, but perhaps a sense of resolution. This chapter of betrayal and trauma was finally closed, allowing me to turn my focus to what lay ahead. The machinations had been brutally unpleasant but a necessary crucible to ensure my complete autonomy moving forward. Never again would I allow anyone or anything to compromise the destiny I had fought so hard for. I was Lillian Reese, newly anointed captain of my own fate, and the world had better be ready for my brand of merciless stewardship. As the ashes settled from the scorched battlefield that was my divorce, I wasted no time in firmly establishing my leadership over Reese Industries. The board meetings that had once been merely a formality were now the arenas where I flexed my hard-won power. Profitability is down over 12% compared to last quarter's projections. I stated in a tone that brooked no argument as I stared down the assembled executives. I want to know why, and I want solutions on my desk within 48 hours. There was a momentary silence as the senior leadership team avoided eye contact, each silently willing one of the others to step into the firing line first. Finally, Stephen, the CFO who had been Martin's loyal foot soldier for years, cleared his throat. The shortfalls can likely be attributed to the recent transition and its attending disruptions, he began, choosing his words carefully, not to mention the lingering PR headaches from, My eyes narrowed dangerously. "You mean the scandal my dearly departed husband created through his reprehensible behavior, the one that jeopardized this entire company's future through his recklessness?" Stephen visibly shrank back, face flushing. "Well, I didn't mean to imply." "Save it," I cut him off with a withering glare. "I don't want to hear any more excuses about factors beyond our control. We make our own destiny here, and anyone unable to adapt to my leadership would be wise to explore other opportunities." The room had gone deathly quiet, the temperature seeming to drop several degrees as the gathered executives finally recognized the new power dynamics at play. This was no longer the Reese Industries of old, where decisions were debated ad nauseam behind closed doors. There would be no more nods to consensus or democratic hand-wringing. My edicts would be final. Mrs. Reese, Maria, the head of operations, ventured after clearing her throat. If I may be so bold, your decisive vision is a marked change from how we've traditionally operated. I think I speak for everyone when I say an adjustment period will be required before we can realign strategy. A few cautious nods rippled through the table, though most seemed to sense the undercurrent of defiance in Maria's words. My jaw clenched hard enough to crack walnuts. Slowly rising to my feet, I fixed Maria with a look that could blister paint. "Let me make one thing crystal clear for you and your cohorts," I said, my voice like razors scraping steel. I did not survive decades of being gaslit and undermined by that spineless bastard I called a husband only to face further diminishment from his lackey. Maria shrank back in her seat, all bravado evaporating as I stalked around the table toward her. I could sense the others watching with a mixture of disbelief and morbid fascination. None dared intervene as the new order asserted itself. "This company's oligarchic days are over," I stated, leaning in until Maria was forced to maintain eye contact. "Either acclimate to my leadership and start pulling your weight, or I'll find those better suited to my vision. Am I making myself clear?" She nodded almost imperceptibly, seeming to have momentarily forgotten how to form words. Straightening up, I turned my gaze to encompass the entire cowed assemblage. I did not fight my way through the depths of hell itself just to be undermined again. Reese Industries answers to me now and me alone. My lip curled slightly. And if that reality is too difficult for any of you to accept, I'd be more than happy to expedite your transition into unemployment. The silence that followed spoke volumes. The machine had a new master, and woe betide anyone foolish enough to forget that. As the meeting disbanded, I allowed myself a tight, predatory smile. This was merely an opening gambit, the first assertion of the ruthlessness that would be required to remake this company in my own image. Pity Martin hadn't possessed even a fraction of my strength and resolved those final years he frittered away in pursuit of his youthful indulgences. Perhaps then this bloody transition could have been avoided. But in the end, his failures had become my greatest advantage, the forge where my own ferocious independence was smelted, where I emerged hardened, immutable, and finally in complete control of my destiny. I was Lillian Reese, and from this day forward, my name would be synonymous with strength, perseverance, and remorseless ambition. All that remained was for the rest of the world to take heed. With a heavy heart, I watched Kevin pack his briefcase from the doorway of our bedroom. Our relationship seemed like a thick cloud that had descended upon our once contented house, strangling it with tension. My voice was barely audible when I spoke. "I can't believe you're doing this." Kevin glanced up, his eyes icy. "Amelia, what?" "Heading into the office. This family needs someone to keep things going." His words were a painful reminder of the choice I had made only a few days prior, cutting deep. I stepped back into the room. "You know, that's not fair," I said, anger simmering in my chest. "I quit my job for us, for our family." His frustration showed as he snapped his briefcase shut. "No, you left your work because the strain was too much for you. Now you want me to take up the slack." I winced at his words. It was true I had been struggling to adjust to being a stay-at-home mother. But I never anticipated Kevin's level of resentment. "I'm trying, Kevin," I replied, my voice quivering. "It's not easy to give up a career I loved." He sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair. "I'm not looking for a fight. We have some serious things to discuss tonight." The sound of little feet padding down the hallway interrupted us. Harriet, clutching her teddy bear with her golden locks ruffled, appeared in the doorway. "Mommy, Daddy, why are you fighting?" I knelt to her level and forced a smile. "Dear, we're not fighting. Daddy and I were just talking." Kevin scooped her up and kissed her forehead. "Your mom is right, Princess. Everything is fine. Why don't you go find Grandma? She's probably making pancakes." As Harriet ran off, a tinge of regret hit me. How many times had her small ears heard our arguments? Kevin put down his briefcase, his face softening a bit. "All right, tonight we'll talk. I have a suggestion that might help us get back on track." I nodded, unable to find my voice. I had an unshakable feeling that something was very wrong with us. As he left for work, I felt nervous about our upcoming conversation and what it might mean for our future. The day dragged on with dull chores and my in-laws' constant chatter. By the time Kevin returned home, the kids were asleep. After supper, we retired to the study. Breaking the silence, Kevin leaned forward. "I've been thinking about how we can tackle some of our challenges," he began. I arched an eyebrow. With a small smile, he continued, "What if we buy my parents a house with some of our savings? They could move closer, help with the kids more, and take up some of the burden." I felt the air disappear from the room. Our savings, the funds we set aside for our future, for the kids' college. Kevin's smile faded. "I thought you'd be pleased. This solves a lot of our issues." I raised my voice. "Our issues, or the issues with your parents?" Kevin stood up, frustration evident. "Why do you make things so hard? It's the best course of action for our family." I watched in disbelief as he stormed out. Had he really proposed spending our life savings on his parents without my consent? Feeling more alone than ever, I buried my face in my hands, wondering what would happen to us. The next morning, I heard quiet sounds from the kitchen and assumed it was Kevin and his mother. I walked down the corridor cautiously. "Mom, she's being unreasonable," Kevin said. "I thought she'd be pleased with this." His mother responded, "Some women just can't handle the demands of raising a family. Not everyone is suited for it." Biting my lip, I felt hurt and rage battle within me. Is that how people saw me, unable to manage? I had enough. Storming into the kitchen, I confronted Kevin. "For whom is this best?" Both Kevin and his mother looked surprised. His mother quickly put on a smile. "Good morning, dear. How was your night?" Ignoring her, I focused on Kevin. "Were you going to discuss this with me at all?" Kevin looked embarrassed. "Amelia, it's not like that. We were just talking. Talking about making big financial decisions without me? About our future and our children's?" His mother tried to mediate. "Let's not get too fired up. I'll take the kids to the park so you two can talk." She called for Harriet and Jason and left quickly. A sharp stillness settled between Kevin and me when the front door closed. "You cannot continue doing this," I murmured. "You cannot exclude me from decisions that impact our family." Kevin sighed, running his fingers through his hair. "Amelia, I'm not excluding you. I'm looking for solutions." "Kevin, you've been distant," I snapped. "You persuaded me to quit my job, saying I needed to focus on the family." He reached for me, but I pulled away. "That's not true. I thought this would help. My parents could assist with the kids. You'd get more support." "More support?" I laughed bitterly. "Your father barely acknowledges me, and your mother can hardly hide her disdain." Kevin's face hardened. "That's unfair. They've been supportive since you left work." "Supportive?" I sneered. "They've been suffocating. You want to spend our money on them, but I can't make a single decision about our kids without your mother questioning me." He raised his hands. "What else should we do with it? We need the help." I looked into his eyes and saw a stranger. "Kevin, I can't do this anymore. I refuse to be excluded in my own family." His face softened. "Amelia, we can fix this. We just need to." He was interrupted by the sound of the front door opening and the children's excited chatter. "Daddy, Mommy," Harriet yelled, "look what we found at the park." I forced a smile as our daughter ran into the kitchen, holding a shiny pebble. However, I saw Kevin's mother's rough glance above Harriet's head. She was certain that she had won this round. Silently, I vowed as I bent to gaze at Harriet's treasure, this wasn't the end. I wouldn't let them drive me away from my own family. Something needed to change quickly. Staring at the laptop screen in front of me, I sat at the kitchen table, seeing glimmers of the life I had left behind in each email and message that scrolled by. My fingers ached to write a resume so I could return to practicing law, where I had once been quite successful. The sound of Kevin's car driving into the driveway brought me back to reality. Quickly, I shut off the laptop, guilt washing over me. How did I get here? Hadn't I promised my family this? When Kevin saw me, his face lit up. "There you are. Hello. How about we take the kids out to supper tonight? What do you think?" I faked a laugh. "That sounds fantastic. Where are the children?" "Mom took them to the mall. She mentioned something about new school clothes," he replied. My lips twisted into a forced smile. "Did she? I thought we decided to do that together this weekend." Kevin shrugged, seemingly oblivious to my dismay. "Mom offered, and I thought you'd appreciate a break." "A break?" As if I needed to get away from my own children. I swallowed my hurt, trying not to cry. Kevin, we need to talk about your parents, about this whole situation. His shoulders stiffened and he groaned. Not this again, Amelia. I thought we were past this. Past me making decisions for our family? I got up, my anger boiling over. Kevin, you can't just keep making decisions on your own, especially not about our savings. He narrowed his eyes. What's that supposed to mean? I took a deep breath. Earlier, I heard you on the phone. You were talking to a real estate agent, right? Kevin looked surprised and flushed. It was just a preliminary discussion. I was gathering information. Without speaking to me first, I concluded for him. He raked a hand through his hair, frustration evident. Amelia, what do you want from me? I'm trying to act in our family's best interests. Our family, I emphasized, not the one your parents envision. Kevin, me, and the children. My parents are part of our family too. Why can't you see that? He fired back. Something inside me snapped. Because they're taking over. Your father ignores me at family dinners, and your mother constantly criticizes my parenting. And you let it happen. Kevin's face grew stern. That's unfair. They just want to help. Help? I laughed bitterly. Is that what you call it when your mother insults my parenting and your father avoids me? Kevin, am I wrong? When was the last time your parents weren't involved in a decision we made together? He opened his mouth, then closed it again, unable to respond. That's what I thought, I said, feeling my strength waning. Kevin, I can't keep living like this. There has to be a change. For a moment, I saw a glimmer of the thoughtful, kind man I had married. But then his face closed off again. You're right, something does have to change. You need to accept that this is our life now, Amelia. My parents are here to stay. We'll all be happier if you embrace that sooner rather than later. Shock and sadness filled me as I looked at him. Was this really the state of our marriage? The sound of the front door opening and the eager chatter of our kids was followed by Kevin's mother's voice. We're back. Wait until you see what we bought. Kevin turned to greet his mother and the children, giving me a look that clearly indicated our discussion was over. As I stood there, a horrifying realization overwhelmed me. This was no longer just about Kevin's parents, it was about the future of our marriage. And for the first time, I wasn't sure if it had one. I sat at the desk in our shared study, pen poised over paper, my heart thumping in my chest. The house was eerily quiet. This was it, the breaking point. I glanced at my watch. It was 2:37 a.m. with his head in the clouds. Kevin had no idea our world was about to change. The kids were safely nestled in their beds, unaware of the turmoil that had been building for months. My hand trembled as I started writing. Kevin, the kids and I will be gone by the time you read this. I can no longer live this way. Tears blurred my vision as I poured out my grief, disappointment, and betrayal onto the paper. I wrote about being ignored, about his parents' persistent interference, and about the dreams I had given up only to be treated as an outsider in my own home. I let out a sob as I signed my name at the bottom, quickly stifling it so as not to wake anyone. This was not the future we had planned together, and it was not how I had expected my life to turn out. However, things happen, people change, and sometimes you have to have the courage to alter your own narrative. I carefully folded the letter and placed it in the middle of Kevin's desk where he couldn't miss it. Quietly, I made my way upstairs to rouse the kids. Mommy? I shook Harriet gently awake. She murmured something sleepy. What's wrong? She inquired while rubbing her eyes. Nothing's wrong, sweetheart. I lied. We're taking a little getaway. Could you please help me with your brother, like a big girl? Though still half asleep, she nodded. Being the lighter sleeper of the two, Jason was usually easier to wake up. In a matter of minutes, I had them both dressed and ready to leave, holding their beloved stuffed animals tightly in their arms. I held my breath as we tiptoed down the steps, hoping Kevin wouldn't wake up. His snoring from our bedroom was a comforting sound, but it also cut deeply. I no longer felt like I knew this man I had once loved more than anything. We arrived at the car without any problems. Harriet's little voice sliced through the evening air as I strapped the children into their seats. Where's Daddy, Mommy? Isn't he coming with us? Even though I knew the question was coming, I froze, unprepared. No, my dear, Daddy has to stay here. But don't worry, we'll see him shortly. Even though the lie hurt my tongue, I couldn't bring myself to utterly destroy their reality, not quite yet. As I slid into the driver's seat, my attention was drawn to a movement. Kevin's mother was standing there in the upstairs window. When our gazes locked, time seemed to stop. I saw the beginning of comprehension, a spark of wrath, and then, shockingly, something that nearly seemed like satisfaction. I fired the engine and slid out of the driveway. Without thinking, I drove through the lonely dark streets with shaking palms on the steering wheel. Where were we going? How would we proceed? My head was filled with questions that felt endless. However, I felt calmer when I looked at my sleeping kids in the rearview mirror. We would work things out. It was necessary. My phone buzzed just as the first rays of dawn started to strike the sky. My blood ran cold as I saw Kevin's name flash on the screen with a sentence. "You have no right to take my kids. My attorney will be in touch. Amelia, you're not going to get away with this." My resolve strengthened, and I threw the phone onto the passenger seat. Now there was no turning back. I would confront the next challenge and any upcoming struggles for the sake of my children and myself. I allowed myself a tiny grin as the sun rose, casting a picture of opportunity and optimism over the earth. This was only the start of a new chapter in our narrative, not its conclusion. I arrived at a dilapidated motel's parking lot, fatigue filling my body. Despite the mess in our lives, the children's faces were serene as they slept soundly in the back seat. I was about to cry as I propped my head on the steering wheel when I heard a tap on the window. "Amelia, is that you?" Blinking in shock, I looked up to see my high school best friend, Jasmine, gazing through the glass, a face I hadn't seen in a long time. "Jasmine," I gasped, wiping my eyes hastily as I got out of the car. "What are you doing here?" She drew me into a close embrace. "I manage this place. But forget about me. What's happening? Are you all right?" Something inside me shattered at the concern in her voice. Before I knew it, I was crying in her arms, telling her the entire tale between sobs. With each phrase, I felt a little lighter, the weight of the past few months slowly lifting off my shoulders. Jasmine's expression became more serious as she listened. After I was done, she gave my shoulder a squeeze. "You won't remain in this hole. Come on, I'll give you my extra room." After an hour, the kids were nestled into cozy beds, and I took a seat at Jasmine's kitchen table, enjoying a warm cup of tea. "So what's your plan?" Jasmine inquired politely. Feeling confused, I gazed into my tea. "I'm not sure. I simply could not stay there any longer. However, I can see from Kevin's text that he will fight for the kids." Jasmine's eyes became stony. "Now you attack, Amelia. You've always been the sharpest person I know. You're capable of doing this." "I don't even have an attorney," I said as the truth of my position hit home. A cunning smirk appeared on Jasmine's face. "To be honest, I think I could assist with that. Do you recall Steven from high school?" A beat skipped in my heart. Steven was the boy I'd secretly lusted after for years. "What about him?" "He's a divorce lawyer now, one of the best in the state," reasoned Jasmine. She paused, then took a step forward. "He always had a thing for you." My cheeks began to flush, and I felt guilty. As I was leaving my spouse, I found myself blushing over a high school crush. "Jasmine, I cannot afford a top-tier attorney. I moved on from everything." Jasmine dismissively waved her hand. "Let me speak with him. Just get along with him, please, for me." My phone buzzed, and it was another text from Kevin before I could reply. "My folks are worried. How could you harm our family in this way? I'll make sure you never see the kids again, so go home immediately." I gave Jasmine the message while shaking my hands. Her expression grew serious. "That resolves the matter. Steven is the first person I'm phoning in the morning." That night, I couldn't fall asleep. As I lay in bed, the sensation that I was perched on a cliff persisted in my mind. Meeting with Steven seemed like the end of the road, like my marriage had officially ended. However, as I considered Kevin's icy reasons and his parents' oppressive presence, I concluded that my marriage had long since ended. I just hadn't had the guts to say it. I heard Jasmine's voice in the corridor when I woke up the following morning. "Yes, Steven, you can meet her at 2 p.m. Many thanks for it." Jasmine turned to face me as I came out of the bedroom, her expression a mix of excitement and trepidation. "Amelia, Steven's agreed to meet with you today." My heart pounded. This was the turning point in my life and in my children's lives as well. "Great." Astonished by the volume of my voice, I hugged my drowsy kids and got ready for the day. As I did, hope kindled in me, something I hadn't felt in years. I no longer felt alone. No matter what lay ahead, I felt ready to fight for the life I deserved for the first time in a very long time. I waited in Stephen's office, smoothing down my shirt and attempting to get my anxiety under control. It was obvious he had changed from the bashful youngster I recalled. When he stepped in, Stephen held out his hand with a confident, comforting look on his face. "It's been too long, Amelia. I apologize that we have to meet in this manner." A familiar flutter emerged in my gut as we sat down, but I ignored it. This was about my future, my children's future, not about past crushes or what-ifs. Stephen listened carefully as I described my circumstances, his brow furrowing at every new detail. He leaned forward, his gaze fierce after I was done. "I will not sugarcoat this, Amelia. This may turn heated, especially with Kevin's parents involved in his wealth. However, I can assure you that we will battle to the end." Something within me was sparked by his words, a fire I had long since forgotten. "How do we start?" We plotted for the next 60 minutes. As Stephen described our strategy, I sensed the return of my previous legal feelings. We began discussing the details when my phone beeped. I quickly looked at the screen. "It's Kevin. I have to take this." As I left Stephen's office, I answered, "Where are you, Amelia?" Kevin's tone was composed and icy. "My parents are devastated. The children must be brought home right now." Taking a deep breath, I prepared myself. "No, Kevin. I'm not going to return. I've hired an attorney. Please get in touch with him for any more matters." A moment of startled silence fell. Then Kevin's voice became angry. "Do you really believe you can take my kids and get away with it, Amelia? I'm going to ruin you. You'll be lucky if you see them again when I'm through." The call ended. Stephen put his hand on my shoulder, pulling me back to the present moment as I stood there trembling. "Are you all right?" he said, his expression filled with worry. I nodded and wiped away the tears I wasn't even aware I was shedding. "Stephen, he made threats to abduct the children. How if?" With his hands resting on my shoulders, he said, "Hey, we will not let it occur, Amelia. You're not alone in this battle and stronger than you realize." I was overcome with feelings as I stared into his eyes, including dread, thankfulness, and something more I couldn't quite put my finger on. I took a step back and collected myself. "What should we do next?" Stephen's face took on a serious expression. "We must apply for temporary custody right now. We also need to discuss your career, Amelia." Puzzled, I blinked. "My profession? But I abandoned that." "Exactly," Stephen stated in a stern tone. "And in court, that will be used against us. We must demonstrate your ability to care for the kids independently." It struck me like a stone. I had sacrificed everything for my family, and now I could lose my kids because of that one sacrifice alone. With uncertainty beginning to seep in, I said, "I don't know if I can go back." Stephen grew more determined. "Amelia, I knew in high school that you were a determined individual who could accomplish anything. You only need to locate her again since that woman is still there." That day, when I walked out of Stephen's office, my head was spinning. Rebuilding my profession, fighting Kevin and his parents, and attempting to keep my kids safe felt like an impossible task. But I felt a glimpse of optimism for the first time in years. Harriet's big eyes met mine as I tucked her and Jason into bed that evening. "When are we going home, Mama?" My heart tightened. "Oh, my dear," I replied, drawing her near. "We're at home now. Our home is wherever we are when we are together." I vowed in silence as I held my daughter. I would build us a new home, one that was free of love, respect, and hardship. No matter how long it took or how fierce the battle was, I was prepared for the difficult path ahead. The old Amelia was coming to her senses and ready to reclaim her life. In front of me stood the courtroom, a rising reminder of the conflict I was going to engage in. Grasping my suitcase firmly, I attempted to calm my anxiety. Our interim custody court was today, and I knew that Kevin and his parents would make a big deal out of it. Stephen touched my shoulder with a kind hand. "You can succeed, Amelia. Keep in mind all we've planned." I nodded, and as we stepped into the building, I inhaled deeply. I saw Kevin, his parents, and their attorney huddled together. My fury boiled at my mother-in-law's nasty expression. When the hearing started, I watched in growing terror as Kevin's attorney presented me as an unstable, careless mother who had deserted her family on a whim. They brought up my choice to resign from my position, misrepresenting it as proof that I couldn't support the kids. Stephen expertly made our case when it was our turn, emphasizing my years of successful legal profession and commitment to my kids. However, I noticed the judge's doubtful look. Uncertainty tore at me. Had I committed a grave error? I noticed Kevin's mother talking loudly in the hallway during our recess break. Naturally, as soon as we gain custody, we'll be moving in to help with the kids instead of some unstable mother who can't decide what she wants out of life. They need a secure environment. A part of me broke. I marched up to her before I had a chance to consider. How could you? I growled. From the beginning, you have been attempting to push me away. Guess what, though? I'm over being treated unfairly. I will use every ounce of might to battle you for those children of mine. Kevin's father moved to separate us. Amelia, you've gone insane. Right now, you're supporting our argument that you're unfit to be a parent. When I turned to face Jasmine, her eyes were flaming. I felt a touch on my arm. Remove yourself, she told my in-laws. You are no longer allowed to harass her. Stephen showed up as a gathering formed, and he gently drew me away. This isn't helping, Amelia. We must pay attention to the hearing. However, the harm had already been done. As soon as we entered the courtroom again, I sensed the judge's critical stare. My outburst had given Kevin the upper hand. Given the evidence submitted and the recent display in the hallway, I'm inclined to grant temporary custody to the father with supervised visits for the mother, the judge said, clearing his throat. The entire globe appeared to be tilted. My breathing stopped. This cannot be taking place. Stephen asked for a break right away, and the judge reluctantly agreed. I followed him into a private conference room in drowsiness. Amelia, pay attention to me, Stephen pleaded. We still have work to do, but we must adjust our strategy. You must demonstrate to the judge that you are a responsible, stable parent who prioritizes your kids. With tears flowing down my cheeks, I gave a mute nod. However, Stephen, how are they going to take my babies? I can't let them go. His gaze was fierce as he held on to my shoulders. I need you to get yourself together because we are going to fight this. I know the Amelia who never gives up. She refuses to be bullied by anyone. Where's that Amelia? His comments ignited a flame of purpose within me, piercing through my sadness. I straightened my back as I wiped my eyes. She is here, and she is prepared for battle. I saw Kevin and his parents as we were about to enter the courtroom again, and their arrogant looks strengthened my determination. This was no longer just about me. It was also about proving to my kids what it meant to stand up for oneself and escape their hold on me. After inhaling deeply, I squared my shoulders. The conflict had not ended. It was only getting started, and this time, I was prepared for battle. With my pulse racing, I watched the judge get ready to hand down his decision in the courtroom. It had taken months of struggles, restless nights, and unwavering resolve to get to this point. Seated on the other side were Kevin and his parents, their expressions a mix of hate and confidence. The judge's voice echoed through the hushed chamber as he spoke. This court has carefully considered all presented evidence in the matter of custody for Jason and Harriet. Feeling Stephen's comforting presence alongside me, I held my breath. The world appeared to stop when the judge announced that Amelia Matthews would receive primary custody and that Kevin Matthews would have significant visitation rights. As the court proceeded to go over the specifics of the custody agreement, I could only concentrate on a tremendous sensation of relief and vindication that rushed over me. I heard Kevin's mother gasp and saw Kevin's face crumple in shock. Stephen looked up at me. His smile was contagious, encouraging, and more than that, it made my heart skip a beat. Kevin came over to me outside the courthouse, his parents watching from a distance. Amelia, I'm sorry for everything, he murmured quietly. I nodded, astonished that I didn't feel angry. I apologize as well, Kevin, but this is best for all of us. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders as they left. Not only had I prevailed in the custody dispute, but I also won my independence. Jasmine came running up and gave me a bear hug. You succeeded, girl. I knew you could. I laughed so hard that happy tears ran down my cheeks. Jasmine, without you, I could not have succeeded. You gave me hope when I had none that night at the hotel, and you rescued me. She gave my hand a squeeze. That is the purpose of friends. Go now and enjoy the occasion with your children and perhaps a specific attractive lawyer. I looked at Stephen, who was putting his briefcase away, and his face flushed. My gut gave me that recognizable flutter as our eyes locked. After a happy reunion with Harriet and Jason later that evening, I sat on Jasmine's porch and watched the sunset. Stephen came over to join me, holding 2 glasses of wine. He handed me a glass and said, "To new beginnings." I grinned and gently tapped my glass against his. "Towards fresh starts." Stephen finally said something after a little period of comfortable silence. You know, Amelia, from what I've seen these past few months, you're amazing. I can see that you've changed from that first day when you came into my office because of the way you battled for yourself and your kids. I nodded, a wave of pride rising within me. I'm not. I just discovered aspects of myself I had assumed were lost forever. Stephen reached out to touch me, and his touch ignited something within me. Maybe we could grab dinner sometime, just the two of us, now that the dust has settled. I saw warmth, adoration, and the potential for more as I gazed into his eyes. I paused for a second, old worries threatening to come back, but then I remembered all that I had accomplished and all that I had conquered. Yes, please, I murmured quietly. I thought back on my journey, including the hardships, times of hopelessness, and agony that had led me here. As the last of the sunshine illuminated the sky in dazzling hues, I realized this was where they had all led. I had regained my strength, my freedom, and a network of support I never realized I needed. Even though the future was still unknown, I felt optimistic about it for the first time in a long time. I still had my independence, my kids, and maybe a future worth of love ahead of me. This wasn't simply the end, this was only the beginning. As I savored my wine and felt Stephen's warm hand in mine, I understood that this was my start, and I was prepared to enjoy every second of it.